Hey, I'm Magic, and this is Trend Lines brought to you by OraclesElixir.com. Let's wrap up the 2017 spring regular season by looking at whose stock is rising and whose is falling in the NA LCS heading into the playoffs. First up, I want to look at FlyQuest's AD carry, Altec. I don't want to go completely into Altec's backstory, but I do want to hit a couple of points in his history just to give some context for what I'm going to say here. So, Altec, has been around for quite a long time. He's played on a lot of different teams over a lot of different years, but he first kind of came to prominence and looked really impressive, in my opinion, or first stood out to me, when he was playing with Gravity in summer 2015. He had played with Winter Fox before, he'd played with Evil Geniuses, but what he did with Gravity was he had a role where he had to stay safe in the back line, play cleanup team fights. It's a pretty classic role for an AD carry, and it depends on what meta you're in, but he did it really well. He was kind of similar to someone like Steelback in Europe last year. Meanwhile, the other four players in Gravity would dive forward. They'd force the center of the team fights away from Altec and give him lots of room to work with. And this is where we learned a lot about the potential of some of the teammates that he had at the time, people like Hauntzer, Bunny Fufu, and Keen. The way they could play and the way that team worked together was really interesting and unique. Gravity would draft champions that fit that style. So the most clear examples were what Bunny Fufu would do at support. He'd play people like Thresh or Shen who want to go into a fight and land their crowd control, but they can also throw shields backwards. So Thresh can throw his lantern back and still help Altec while he was in the front line of a fight. Or Shen could obviously drop his ultimate after diving in with his taunt. So Altec would mostly play things like Sivir if he wanted to, help all four of his teammates charge forward. He'd play Tristana for the cleanup, with the chaining of the whatever that skill is called, the rocket jump, and this really worked well for them. And it's where Altec looked really good, cleaning up all those team fights, barely ever dying, and getting a ton of kills. In 2016, Altec moved to Energy, where he looked much worse. The team didn't play around him the same way. They weren't that coordinated. The entire team was really out of sync, so it's hard to really pin things on Altec. But he just didn't look as good, and he wasn't in the right environment for him, I think. He stepped back into Challenger with Cloud9 for the summer. He was better at that lower level competition, but he had some odd elements to his playstyle that emerged over the course of that year. For example, he did an oddly high amount of split pushing, all on his own, off in a side lane, just catching farm, which is something that AD carries don't really do a whole lot these days. This split, he qualified into LCS with Cloud9 Challenger. They became FlyQuest. He hasn't been great this split overall, but I do think he's trending up the past couple weeks because he's been better, first of all, at laning, which is something that's been a really big weakness for him. In weeks 1 to 7, his CS difference at 10 minutes was an average of minus 6.2. Weeks 8 and 9, only minus 1.3. So that's a big improvement. It's still not good laning. It's not above average, but it's a big improvement. It helps him, not be working from such a big deficit. There's still some big issues in lane, the way he plays some of the micro positioning, but he seems to be getting a lot more gank support from Moon lately, and also high roaming down. FlyQuest just playing towards the bottom lane a little bit better from what I've seen. And also he's been playing a lot of Caitlyn, Varus. In the last 2 weeks, he's played 5 games on Caitlyn, 4 games on Varus, 1 game on Ashe. And those champions, especially Caitlyn and Varus, have really long range. They're good in lane, and I think it helps him out a lot with getting through that laning phase. More importantly than the laning, he's been able to stay safe in the backline. Again, those champions really help. That's their role, is to be in the backline and get their damage out from range. Caitlyn especially has a lot of kiting tools, or Varus has the good self-peel with his ultimate. And they've also been drafting around him some really beefy front lines. So that has really helped Altec be in his comfort zone, which is the backline cleanup teamfight carry. So overall, Altec has looked a lot better in the past couple weeks. His teammates help, and the way the team is playing around him has been a big reason why, and I think the meta shift has helped with that. Generally, Altec is a player who thrives in the right circumstances. FlyQuest are giving him those circumstances, and it's been good to see. He's also, to kind of pull the reins on this a little bit and not get too excited about Altec. He's benefited from some off-base macro plays, some bad dive execution from Echo Fox, from Team Liquid. So before we see him against CLG in the first round of the playoffs, let's not get too excited about where he's going. This is an improvement. I'm not trying to say that he's been turned into one of the best AD carries in North America. I don't think he's climbing into the top 3 or anything in current form. But he hasn't been at the bottom. He's climbed up into the middle of the pack, which is a big help for FlyQuest because they need that extra carry support. If FlyQuest want to have a chance in the playoffs, They need Altec to continue to improve because he's going to be facing off against some of the stiffer competition in North America, playing against Stixay and Aframu, who are quite good, and CLG have good coordination in team fights and should hopefully be able to target Altec better than, for example, Team Liquid did in the last series of the regular season, where Team Liquid had no ability to seemingly to dive onto Altec and actually attack him in the fights. So I think CLG will make it more difficult for him, and I want to see how well he can hold up to that. Moving on, whose stock is falling a little bit. I want to look at Phoenix1. And, again, this is one I don't want to get too carried away about because their last week was up against Cloud9 and TSM. They went 0-4. That doesn't tell the whole story because there are both some reasons to worry beyond that record and say 0-4 looks bad, but, here are the real reasons to worry. But there are also some reasons not to read too much into it. So first, let's look at some of the warning signs. Against Cloud9, I really questioned the way Phoenix1 approached the drafts. In Game 1, they drafted 2 losing lanes, they lacked wave clear, and they were going into a team comp that could split push, shove waves really well, and get picks. So Phoenix1 basically drafted themselves into a situation where I believe Meteos was on a lease. If Meteos didn't get them a lead in a situation where he had 2 losing lanes to work with, they were going to run into this really dangerous split push pick comp that they didn't really have the tools to defend against because they couldn't safely wave clear. Their comp didn't really have the tools for it. It's really hard to get into the lead, to control the jungle, and get into their own split push, which is something their comp did have. So they drafted themselves into a really, really tough situation to work in. Game 2 against Cloud9, they had 2 losing side lanes. They had Jason to Orianna in the mid lane with, playing up against Jensen, who's a really, really strong laner. So again, they put themselves in a situation where it's really hard to get a lead and work from a position of strength in the mid game. Against TSM, I thought Phoenix1's draft was a little better. Execution was more of an issue, but there was improvement there, but there was obviously the step back in their performance from putting in Inori and putting in Shady, and just they didn't look as good as when they had Meteos and Stunt playing. So there are some issues there that I'm a little concerned about. There are also issues with the way Zig has been getting targeted by their opponents. He's usually a low econ kind of supporting top laner. He'll play utility and tanks and playmakers, with the Kled being kind of a unique kind of a playmaker. He's got a couple of pocket pick carries, but he, as was pointed out a lot on air, Zig gets minimal help from his jungler. He kind of does his job, but isn't really the one who's going to drive the win. And opponents identified that, they exploited it, and there's nothing really in Zig's history or the way his teams have played around him, from what I've seen, that shows that Phoenix1 can pivot and suddenly, oh no, Zig is going to get attacked, now let's play around him more, protect him, and make him a win condition. So I'm wondering what Phoenix1 is going to do to handle that now that they're going into the playoffs, where they're going to get scouted by a specific opponent who's going to specifically target them the way that they were targeted in the last week. So in my opinion, Phoenix1 need to make sure going forward that they draft more winning lanes. They make sure that Ryu and Arrow especially are able to stabilize. And Zig needs to make sure he can survive the top lane matchup, not give up, not get snowballed on by a lot of gank pressure, have a champion that can survive tower dives, things like this. And he needs to find back a little more of his playmaker mentality, which might be helped by hopefully having Meteos back in the lineup. I think Phoenix1 really need to bring him in, because Meteos can play things like the Zac that brings more of the playmaking in, supports Zig. I think bringing Stunt in would help with that as well, because he's got a playmaker mindset. All of those 3 really need to be the ones going out and kind of throwing the punches for Phoenix1, and hopefully that'll help them get back on track for the playoffs. I want to wrap this off by taking a very quick look at a forecast of the first playoff matchups. Just some very quick thoughts. I'm sure we'll see a lot more of this and do some more detailed previews over the next couple weeks, but first let's look at Phoenix1 against Dignitas. Something here that I see a lot of potential for is a really interesting stylistic mismatch. I want to see what happens between the engage work of the trio of Zig, Meteos, and Stunt, like I've just been talking about. If they can bring out the Zac, bring out the Kled, these kinds of tools, the way they go and make proactive plays, and pairing that against the reactive teamfight of Dignitas, which is somewhere they've had a lot of strength. When enemies try to engage into Dignitas, they've been very good at receiving those engages, turning them around, and winning teamfights. There's also a really interesting stylistic mismatch in the sense that Dignitas have their main strength in the top lane with Someday. Phoenix1 have their main strength in the bottom lane with Arrow. and somewhat in mid with Ryu. So there's a stylistic mismatch there as well. So I think this could make for a really interesting flavor to the series. Assuming the Phoenix1 bring back in Meteos and Stunt, I'm favoring them in the series. But we'll probably get some more, like I said, detailed previews on that going forward. And then Counterlogic Gaming against FlyQuest. This is one where something that stands out about both of these teams to me is how little farm they get, especially on the top laners. They're 8th and 9th in lane efficiency, which is a metric I released recently, how much lane farm a team gets compared to how much lane farm their opponents get. And both CLG and FlyQuest give up a lot of minions and allow their enemies to farm the minions a lot more. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, how many minions just get, unfarmed throughout the series. But for FlyQuest, I think their win conditions in this series are going to be getting good aggressive plays, especially from Moon and him asserting himself over Xmithie, also from High. Getting proactive plays from them, with Altec hopefully continuing on and improving his recent form. CLG on their side, their win condition is going to be more about their scouting, their preparation, their ability to understand the way FlyQuest will play, to be able to read that, react to it within games, and just kind of be on their toes and figure out kind of what's going to come at them and from which angle, and with all the creative ways that FlyQuest can play. And then CLG, if they can take it into the late games, I think they've got better coordination, they've got better team fighting, they've got just a better average skill level across their team, and that's why I think CLG are going to be able to use that preparation strength that they have, which is something their coaching staff and their players are very good at. They're going to be able to roll the punches from FlyQuest and take the series, and will probably be some longer games. So this has been Trendlines for Week 9 of the NA LCS. Remember to check out oracle.elixir.com for in-depth player, team, and champion stats and analysis.